Fellow Ghanaians, thank you very much for joining us on Upfront on the JoyNews channel. So today we're having a very, very important conversation because I do know there are many of you who are worried. In fact, you're concerned about the fact that even with COVID-19 still with us, you would have to pay more. You'd have to pay taxes on petroleum products. You'd have to pay more taxes when it comes to the National Health Insurance Levy, which has been increased. And you also would have to pay more in VAT flat rate that has been increased. And you ask yourself that very important question. And I'm sure many of you have heard that, oh, there are so many leakages, particularly at our entry points in this country. And that if we're able to deal with it, we wouldn't have all the problems that we have. My name is Winston Amoa, and welcome to Upfront. When we return after this break, I'll be introducing my guest who has the expertise. In fact, he is the one in charge of ensuring that you and I, or the whole country Ghana, is able to deal with revenue generation at our entry points. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this break. All right, so welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us here on Upfront on the JoyNews channel. And this evening, we're joined by the Commissioner of Customs at the Ghana Revenue Authority. And I'm sure you know what that means. He's the man tasked with ensuring that we're able to mobilize so much revenue at our entry points. Colonel Kojo Damwa, retired. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you're doing very well.
Yes, I am. Thank you also for having me on your program.
Great. So we do know that in 2020, during COVID-19, your target was reduced from 13 billion to 10 billion, but you exceeded that target when you were able to mobilize 12.6 billion. So congratulations on that score. But the question also is that all there is to be mobilized at our entry points? 12.6 billion in 2020.
Well, I believe in every human institution, the objective always will be perfection, but that is quite elusive. It's not always that you can achieve perfection. And therefore, if we were to relate it to tax matters, one would expect that you collect 100% of all that you need to collect. But certainly that's a big challenge. And some of them are things that may be beyond your control, in the sense that it will mean that every activity that occurs by way of goods coming in by land, by sea, by air, will have to be captured. That's the only way you can say that we have 100% collection. But we know, especially on our land frontiers, we know that we have one of the most porous frontiers in our sub-region, and for that matter, on the continent. And the issue has to do with several unapproved routes. And so once you have several unapproved routes, and then seasonally, especially in the northern parts of the country where the harmattan has a big toll on the vegetation, and therefore during the dry season, virtually every part of the frontiers are open because it makes it passable by all types of vehicles and human movement. So that in itself poses a challenge, and it makes it almost impossible for us to collect 100% of all the revenue that we should collect. Now, one would expect that what probably we may lose by way of the land frontiers, we could also achieve by way of entry through the seaport and the airport. But then certainly we are talking about all, and all means land, sea, and air. So that's why I'm saying that it is an objective that we maximize, we optimize, we collect everything. But you know that it is a big challenge to say that you are collecting everything. So what we try to do is to optimize and look at all the options and ensure that as humanly possible, everything that has to be collected will be collected.
But let's look at, we'll get back to the land, but let's look at the sea, for instance. So we know the points of entry when it comes to a sea.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be easy for us to say we have collected all, knowing that these are the points of entry?
Yes, with the sea, okay, we have two major seaports, Tema and Takoradi. And now, by way of technology, it is easier to monitor the movement of goods from the port through the various clearing systems until they get out. But there are certain imperatives based on World Customs Organization, World Trade Organization agreements. So, for instance, the risk assessment, how you implement that policy, so, such that you can have trade facilitation and then at the same time have maximum revenue collection or generation. And these two appear somehow to be pulling one another apart.
How?
And yes, trade facilitation ideally means make it possible for the various importers, declarants, clearing agents, freight forwarders to clear goods within the shortest possible time without any fuss or, so without let and hindrance, so at least cost, and then within the shortest possible time. So what it means is that use a combination of factors, a combination of strategies to ensure that you spend the least possible time by way of clearing these goods.
Yes, so how does that affect revenue collection?
For instance, we have categorization of the risks. We've categorized them based on color code. We have red representing maximum risk. We have yellow representing possibility of risk, at the same time possibility of no risk. And then we have green, which means no risk or the least risk. So ideally, you remember when His Excellency the Vice President said that by paperless, single window, and using electronic means, we should not be doing intrusive examination, but rather just about 10% of intrusive examination, the rest based on the regimes and post-clearance strategies. So if we were to do that, what it means is that because you want to clear your ports, you want people to be able to clear their goods within the shortest possible time, maximum, say, 24 hours or 48 hours. Use technology, use the scanners, generate reports on these containers, goods that are leaving the port. And then based on the reports that you generate from these scanners, you would later use post-clearance means to deal with any possible violations and infractions of customs rules and regulations. So in that case, the suggestion would have been that about 90% of the containers coming should be given the green light to leave the port, so that then you use the post-clearance system. So that's what I mean. So if you were to do that, that will ensure that all the goods that pass through would not spend more time than necessary. So, but you have a trail of all the activities, and the scanners will capture, because the consignment gets onto the deck, and then every information about it, the images and the reports, it takes some time. So if you do not do the intrusive examination and you allow it to go, then you can have this trade facilitation. You're having goods being cleared within record time. So that's the aspect. Then the revenue and security concerns are that be sure about every item that leaves the port. So when the container gets onto, you are saying that as much as possible, the surest way to be convinced that security concerns and revenue concerns have been taken care of is to do intrusive examination, meaning bringing out every item from the container and physically examining every item. And definitely that comes at a cost, and it comes at the expense of time and all that. So that's why I said that we could always have a reasonable balance between the two, not compromising on revenue and security concerns, and at the same time looking at trade facilitation. But then that mix, where to strike the reasonable balance, is always a challenge.
We'll get to striking the reasonable balance, but is it the case, I want to understand that under the circumstance, the trade facilitation could be affecting revenue mobilization?
It could, yes, but not necessarily if other measures are put. For instance, that system is based on the assumption that you have effective post-clearance mechanisms in place. Post-clearance means that the person has completely cleared the goods out of the port, and the goods have reached their destination in the premises of the owners or wherever. If it is in a warehouse, they are there, whatever. But then you now use the reports, the initial documentation that went into the system, right from the pre-arrival through the arrival, classification and examination, to do that. And then you now have the documents and the reports from the scanners to go and physically compare with what is available, and to be sure that the quantities, the descriptions, and the values and everything are as should have been, and therefore there's no loss of revenue. So that capacity to be able to do effective post-clearance audit is what may or may not make it possible for you to.
Are you able to do that?
To a very large extent, yes, but we are handicapped in some way. By way of expertise, by way of capacity building, by way of numbers, people being able, and then by way of time. Because last year, for instance, because of COVID, we had to suspend a lot of audit activities because it meant that sending teams, and because the aim was as much as possible to use electronic means to do things, we were not able to do a lot of the physical post-clearance audit. It had to be virtual, using the same documents that were used to clear the goods. So if you were not to have the opportunity to go physically to check and compare with what you have by way of documentation, then you still risk not realizing the maximum revenue from these transactions.
Don't you have technology that can help you, for instance, know, even if a container is classified as green, what is entailed in it, and thus don't have to resort to post-clearance audits?
No, the technology is the scanners. Mm-hmm. The scanners are there, and all the containers are put on the scanners, and then the pictures are taken, reports are generated. For instance, if you have, depending on the type of goods that are coming, you can either have homogeneous or heterogeneous goods. If it is homogeneous, if you are bringing, say, let's say, cartons of a certain commodity, and they are all in the same shape, that's homogeneous. If everything in that container is that type, straight away, the scanner picks the images, and if you see any unusual item that does not fit into that description of homogeneity, then definitely you would have some suspicion to pinpoint. And so the scanner generates a report, which report will now feed into the post-clearance system. So the scanner's report plus all other documentations that the importer or declarant presented right from the offices of the Customs Technical Services Bureau, where the classification and valuations are done, would help you to be able to determine whether or not the right duties have been paid.
Great. So let's get to this particular situation again. Has there been an instance where after, during your post-clearance audit, you found certain anomalies in there?
Sure, there have been a few instances.
Share them with me. What has been those instances?
So what it means is that once they determine that there have been some infractions or what we call customs offenses, then the reassessment is done, and then whatever difference we call the short collection shortage is assessed, and then penalties are exacted on that, and then the corporates are made to pay the duties that they should have paid, which they did not pay, and then the penalty that is exacted. So there's been instances where people or certain persons have cleared their containers, and then after your audit, you realize they didn't pay the right duties. Yes. And demand notices are issued to these companies, and these are based on real documentation and facts. All the reports put together, you are able to come to that determination, and then our post-clearance auditors will have discussions with these traders or importers or persons who really cleared these goods, and then once the understanding is reached, the taxpayer always has the right to object. The right of objection is inbuilt as part of the checks and balances. So if he objects, he's also supposed to, by law, pay at least 30% of what assessment has been made while the objection is being upheld. And then after a final determination, if indeed what the post-clearance audit came up by way of their new assessment is true, then it will be sustained and the payment will be effected.
Great. So that means you're putting in place measures, you're ensuring that even, if someone beats the system, you're able to get a person. But would you agree that you are not able to post-audit all of them?
Not that we are not able to.
Are you able to do that?
We are able to, but a time frame.
So,
because the schedules are prepared, and the post-clearance audit team undertakes these by time. So it is something that eventually, once they do the initial assessment, and the realization is that there's the need for that post-clearance audit to be done about a particular consignment, it will certainly be done. But it's only a question of time.
Yeah,
it's
but
only
so
a question of time.
My question is, do you post-audit all clearances made?
Ideally, we are supposed to.
Do you do that?
Because of some challenge, one, the numbers, two, time. So, but every year, the post-clearance audit department draws a program and then indicates where they will be doing the post-clearance audits. And then the financial resources are made available, logistics, everything for them to really do. Okay, so once the plan has been drawn and everything works well, then they should be able to do that. But I'm saying because we have challenges about the capacity, human capacity and logistics, and importantly time, because time is of essence in all this. But I have seen a situation where my deputy commissioner in charge of post-clearance audit is going back as far as, say, 2015 and all that. The law permits us to do. So it means eventually it will be done. It's only a question of time. Once there's the realization that there have been some infractions, certainly the post-clearance audit department would ensure that the appropriate measures are put in place.
So currently, you're not able to engage in all immediately because of time constraints, human capital constraints.
And then logistics.
And logistics constraints. So we can say not all clearances are done immediately.
Are done within a particular financial year, but eventually, because you see your question presupposes that if it is not done today, it means it won't be done forever.
No, not at all.
So that's why I'm saying that once the law permits us to go back as far as, say, 6 years, so even if this year we are not able to do it, we still have it as outstanding. And eventually, because once the reports indicate the possibility of infractions, you definitely will have to do that. Because every year there's the need for reconciliation, and once the reconciliation is done, you will be able to. Now, what is likely to help us solve this problem is what we are trying to do, linking the customs division with the domestic tax revenue division by way of system, by way of our custom system speaking to the domestic tax revenue division system.
Okay.
Now, in the past, we had been operating in two separate silos. Customs operating separately from domestic tax revenue division. The system that we operate, when we're using the GCNet and the West Blue, whatever we did at customs remained with customs. So then the importer or the business person or the individual or the corporate body now would have to present documents separately to the domestic tax revenue, which documents will have no reference to the documents originally passing through customs. But we've seen that that is a big way of allowing or making it easier for some revenues to be lost. And therefore, I think last 2 years, yes, it was last 2 years, latter part of last 2 years, 2019, we had a retreat at Abokobi, and then the two operational divisions, Customs and Domestic Tax Revenue Division, were asked to have systems that will speak to each other. And that was just before the integrated customs management system was being introduced. So domestic tax revenue are also coming up with a system so that these two systems will be compatible and will be speaking to each other. Once that happens, even if we were to lose any revenue by way of customs not being able to do effective post-clearance audit, that information that will be flowing from customs to domestic tax revenue division will make it possible for that to be recovered.
Okay, so you'd agree again that the revenue posted in 2020, the 12.6 billion, could be more than 12.6 billion.
Yes, it could have been more if all aspects, and when I say all regimes of customs and all the frontiers were closely knit, and we said that there was no possibility of anybody smuggling, because once one person smuggles any item, that's a leakage. And we all know that the borders are so porous, the borders are such that there are places that they are not accessible by way of using vehicles that we do. There are places that you need motorbikes. There are places that people by foot are able to evade the system. So all those will impact. And once we are talking about total means by land, by sea, by air. So even if there's one leakage by land, it affects the total possible.
Exactly, but ports, at our seaports, you would say it could be more, except that, like you say, it is not lost. You can always go back for it.
Yes, if everything works as the system has it, then nothing is lost.
But if everything doesn't work as the system has it?
Because we are saying that it may not be possible to have effective post-clearance audit of all transactions within a particular financial year. And we are talking about 2020. So if any audit goes into 2021, it means casting your mind back in 2020, you could have had more if you had been able to do the post-clearance audit within 2020.
Okay. I'm sure you know of the Special Operations Unit established under the presidency in 2013 to deal with some of these revenue leakages, particularly at our ports, right?
Yes.
Good. Now, they were supposed to ensure some of these things were dealt with. The last time I checked, they worked for about a year or two, and then it vanished. In fact, then Deputy Commissioner of GRA, Anthony Doku, is on record to have written to the Deputy Chief of Staff in April 2015 that we lost 36 billion Ghana cedis. That letter was written in April 2015. So if we lost that much at our points of entry, and in 2020, we're able to generate a third of that, have we improved?
Well, I'm not in a position to speak to Mr. Doku's assessment. I've had the opportunity to meet with him when I became commissioner, for him to help me deal with some of these matters. And he talked about so many things, but it is not wholly true that leakages are just like that. But somebody, for instance, made an allegation that his understanding is that about 80% of all containers that get to the ports vanish. So I said, how can that be possible? All right. How can 80% of all containers that get to the port just vanish? Now, we are talking about 2013, that about time is of essence in these discussions. At that time, some of the mechanisms that were in place, we were thinking of paperless, single window with MPP administration coming into place. And therefore, some of the things that have been done electronically, anytime you try to ensure that most things are done without face-to-face contact, without payment of money, directly to officials, you are reducing the possibility of leakages. And that is what has been done since 2017. All attempts have been made to make sure that everything is done paperless. And once you have that being deepened, then the risk of losing so much is minimized or probably eliminated. So the introduction of the integrated customs management system, as it were, came at the right time to deepen this whole aspiration of having paperless single window and dealing with matters electronically, so that you reduce the interface between the public and then the officials dealing with these various steps in the clearance system. Now, it will be, I don't know the time period that Mr. Doku assessed, and he was able to come up with that huge figure, because if you look at the trend, it will be extremely difficult to say that within one particular financial year, what was lost or what was alleged to have been lost or what could have been lost would indeed be about twice what we are collecting. I will find it a bit difficult to believe that indeed that happened in one financial year. Now look at the ports. The ports are such that goods come in, goods are supposed to be cleared to make room, to make way for more goods to come in. And we have areas, terminal operators, various locations where these goods are kept. And then we are given timelines within which these goods must be cleared. And if they are not cleared and they are considered to be uncleared cargo, then they go through other processes. And then some of them, depending on what happens, if they've been confiscated to the state, then they are published in the commercial bulletin, which we refer to as Gazette. And then other processes will be followed and auction would take place and all that. So some goods, in some cases, for very unobvious reasons, stay at the harbor for longer periods. And any good or goods or consignment that stay in the harbor for longer periods means locked revenue. Because the goods are not meant to stay at the harbor or to stay at these locations. They are meant to be cleared and duties on them paid. We also have other regimes, which we call suspense regimes, where the revenue on these goods are not realized at the time that the goods are stored in these warehouses. So it takes some time, and that's when these goods are taken out for purposes for which they were brought in, and they are part of the domestic consumption or production or something, then the duties are paid. So depending on how long these goods also stay in these warehouses or tanks or whatever, it goes to affect the revenue generation. So if somebody by law is allowed to keep these goods in warehouses or in locations bonded, and then they are supposed to use them for production, or you're supposed to use them for some purposes, convert them from suspense to real consumption, domestic consumption, then the payments will be affected. If they haven't done so, it means revenue locked up. There are instances where, as far back as 2010, 2011, 2012, goods that were warehoused are still being warehoused because they have not really been used. So we are also looking at all those challenges, how best we can make people pay for these goods if they are unduly staying in these warehouses.
Great. We'll come back shortly and also look at some challenges that are airports. In recent times, we've seen a complaint about a lack of collaboration at the Kutaka International Airport, and then finally look at tax exemptions. It's a whole conversation we have to have. This is Upfront on the JoyNews channel, and tonight, my guest, Colonel Kojo Damwa, retired, who is the Commissioner, Customs Division of the Ghana Revenue Authority. I'm Winston Amwa. We'll be right back. Welcome back from that short break, and thank you very much for staying with us here on Upfront on the JoyNews channel. We're still looking at how we can, block leakages at our points of entry and how we can generate more revenue for all of us as a country. And this evening we're joined by the Commissioner, Customs Division of the Ghana Revenue Authority, Colonel Kojo Damwa, retired. So, Colonel, we've talked about our seaports. You've identified that, well, there are some challenges in there. But let me just get to, how do you intend, we're in, a new year, it's April though, but how do you intend to ensure that in 2021, we're able to raise more revenue, starting off with our seaports? And then we'll get to the land ports, land entry points, because you've talked about having lots of them unapproved routes. It's important we know how we intend to deal with that. Starting off with the seaports. Okay, with the seaports, we need to have a fair understanding of the system. Now, if you are bringing in goods that legitimately you need to pay duties on, you, the importer, or your agent, or whoever is acting on your behalf, you have the duty to provide the requisite documentation. And this can be done far in advance of the arrival of the goods or on the arrival of the goods, whichever way.
you would bring documents. And we have an office within Customs called Customs Technical Services Bureau. That is the office that is charged with the responsibility of looking at the documents, looking at the nature of the goods, the consignment that you are bringing in, and looking at their description to classify them. We call it classification. So you classify the goods according to their nature. And then when you have done that effectively, then you are able to put values on them. So as I indicated earlier, you, the importer, your first authentic, sincere document is the transactional value document. Ideally, if you're a person of integrity, what you paid for that item, for which a document was given to you, by way of invoice, by way of receipt, that is the one you must present to customers.
What if I'm not a person of integrity? How do you find out?
No, that's why we have a database that will compare what you give to us to what we have in our database. Over the years, we have that. And we do collaboration with other sister customs administrations of other countries. So we are able to compare.
And that's subjected to human intervention, isn't it?
No, that's why I say World Customs Organization, World Trade Organization. These two important world organizations that deal with trade and then generation.
Exactly, but one of your men, one of your personnel would have to first of all raise that alarm and do the comparison, isn't it?
Yes, first and foremost, that's why. So I'll come to that. So when the documents have been fed into the system, it is up to these officers to look at what has been provided, compare with what is in the database, and also do some research to see whether indeed that really represents the true reflection of the transaction.
What if they are compromised?
It's just like the judicial system. You have an officer who first sits on it, and then there's a superior officer above this initial officer. So you have an appeal system inbuilt. So the senior officer reviews what the junior officer has done, or the first officer has done, the other. So one person does it, and it goes on appeal, 2 or 3 people have a look at it. And those up there are more experienced, are more knowledgeable, have had the opportunity to have some studies and expertise on these matters. They've attended World Customs Organization, classification and valuation, conferences, meetings, teachings, what have you. So they ordinarily are slightly above the initial.
In 2017, in 2017, some persons were interdicted for roles in underdeclaring prices. So this is not something that we say does not happen.
You see, that 2017 thing, I wish we were not to go there. But at that time, I was a board member.
Yes.
I was on the HR and legal committee. We went to a presentation was made. As a lawyer, I wasn't convinced. Let me be honest with you. Mm-hmm. I wasn't convinced about the evidence that the whistleblower, the informant, or the person who was making the allegation really put out there. You look on the transaction, several officers have worked on it. It's not one person, as I was explaining. It starts for where they do the classification and valuation, and then other officers go and do the examination. It is a comparison between the initial work done by the officers who saw documents only. At that point in time, it's only documents. At the Customs Technical Services Bureau, you don't see the goods. It's only the documents that the person has brought that you see. So you are dealing with documents, and you are trying to see, based on the nature of the consignment of the goods items in there, whether they really will reflect the true nature and values or not. So when you have used your experience, your expertise, your research to make a certain determination, it is up to the examination officer who has the opportunity to see physically the goods, and therefore can compare the documents on them with the actual consignment, that you can come to a certain determination that, as I said, if a person came and said, I have brought in shirts, and the shirts that I have brought are short sleeve and they are nylon, paper, the one at the Customs Technical Services Bureau has not seen the shirts, but he is believing the documents that the importer, declarant, or the freight forwarder agent have brought. So he assumes that, okay, if it is nylon and it's short sleeves and it's of this nature, then this value is correct, or this value is most probable. So he does it. Then it goes to the examination bay, The examination officers who now have the opportunity to open the boxes and take the shirts one by one and see whether indeed, one, it is a nylon-made shirt, two, whether it's a short-sleeved shirt, whether the, so now he is in the better position to tell that indeed the description of the goods as presented by the original owner is correct. And then the quantities that they talked about are also correct. So you need to match the examination officer's report with that of the initial officers who did the classification and valuation. Until you have that, and if there's a disconnect, then the possibility of having those things were there. But now, in the system, remarks are supposed to be made. So the examination officer who now has the opportunity to physically examine the goods would either agree or disagree with the original classification and valuation that was done. And based on that, depending on which way the thing goes, a verdict will be raised. And if it is short collection, by way of the value or by way of the quantities, then the appropriate customs offense report will be generated, and then the declarant.
So in this case, so in this case, you're saying those persons, there wasn't evidence that they had done something wrong.
I didn't say that there wasn't, but I said that
you were not convinced.
Was not. Yes, and I raised it at that meeting. I raised it. That
what was the outcome of the investigations?
I speak as a person who could be called upon in a court of law, competent court of law, where you will now be called upon to provide evidence. And the evidence that you provide should be the one that is of probative value, which will help you either to prove or disprove a fact. So if I looked at it, and then you need to link every officer to a certain transaction that either caused or made it possible for that thing to have been caused. And we didn't see that. I wasn't convinced. Not that no evidence was produced. The evidence was produced in a manner that you hardly could link a particular officer to a particular transaction from a certain point to another point, such that you are now able to say that on this declaration, this officer was the one who either aided, abetted, facilitated, or did something.
Were some people dismissed?
That thing.
Were some of the interdicted officers dismissed?
No, because eventually the matter was supposed to go to court. It didn't go. Because the evidence, you are going to court. You have to be well armed. You need to be convinced about the evidence that you have adduced. And then before the disciplinary board that was set up, they were unable to really tie in these officers to specific offenses. My approach on the board at that time, what I said was that, fortunately, some of the clearing agents had agreed to make some payments. So I said, what is Ghana Revenue Authority about? Revenue. So let's first go in for the revenue. And once you go in for the revenue, on what basis are you going to make the payment? The clearing agent is paying some money. So once he pays the money, then you use the payment of the money as evidence for the admission of commission of an offense.
And that was
not done. They said, no, let's prosecute them first. And so, there are laws about these things. You have timelines. You have a collective bargaining agreement that specifies the period within which you can interdict and all that. So they exploited all that to advantage, and nothing came out of that case. Because I felt strongly, and I argued my case on the board, that let's first sit with those clearing agents who have admitted, one way or the other, that probably they did something wrong. Now, once you get it, those people will speak to specific declarations that they made. So now, if he says, I'm paying 10 million, on what basis are you paying the 10 million? You're paying the 10 million because you think that on these transactions that I, as a clearing agent or a freight forwarder, acting for on behalf of a particular importer, I did A, B, C, D. Then you use that as a basis to move on to, as it were, get these officers either to be prosecution witnesses or to be accused persons. Okay. But that was not done, and we lost that opportunity. So I'm unable to say that indeed the allegations were true.
Still on this particular issue, as well, we say that particular situation did not happen in 2017. At least we know that in 2011, under the reign of Professor John Evans Atame, it was following the Anas video. Some of these persons were dismissed, at least. We saw that happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've come to even see some of those people still protesting about their complicity in these matters. You know, the ace journalist expose. Some of them were captured on screens, collecting, you know, and later they were. So I am aware that some people indeed were dismissed as a result of it. I'm not saying that nothing wrong is being done by some of our officers. That is not about. You make a specific case about those who were interdicted. Unfortunately, because at that time I was a board member, I was there when they did the presentation.
Exactly.
And after listening to the presentation and the documents that were provided, I expressed my view that I wasn't totally convinced.
So you actually make a point.
The court of law, using the evidence that they adduced before us as board members, will be able to make.
So you made a point that some of the agents were prepared to pay.
That was what I heard.
That's
I never met any.
You never met them?
No, I never met anyone. But in our briefing, we were told that some of them were prepared to sit with customs to,
and that certainly would have been an admission of guilt.
That was my position. So I insisted that then we should go in for that option.
An indication that some of these things were happening.
That could have happened because it was not accepted. Please let me speak in a way that I can defend and justify.
Okay.
I was told in a report at the board meeting that some of them, then we had a letter from the Attorney General's department and all that. So I'm working with evidence that was adduced before me, not hearsay. Okay, because that was hearsay, because I never met with any of those agents, and I was only told that some of them.
Okay.
And so that was why I said, if indeed these agents, freight forwarders, are prepared to sit with customs to make some payments, then that is the first thing for us to do. Let's go in for the money. And once we have the money, you use the money to, as it were, make a case later.
So what's it about customs and the Kotoka International Airport? You've called for collaboration. What's the problem?
I was surprised. My sector commander called me and said that they're having serious challenges with the other security operatives at the port, the airport. So I went, and as usual, I needed to, if I go to a location, any sector, I want to visit every part of the sector to see what they do, how things are done. So we moved from ourselves. Then we got to a point at the arrival section, and then even though my sector commander had informed the other security heads about my coming, they said they were not going to allow us to go beyond a certain point. And even after...
Why were they not going to allow you?
Well, they said instructions that they had. So the sector commander said, this is the commissioner council. He said, yes, he doesn't take instructions from the commissioner council. Well,
But are you allowed to go beyond that?
Oh, it depends on the purpose. Why not? I'm an officer of the state. The nature of my job requires that I go to certain parts of the port where my officers work. I wanted to see where exactly they work. I wanted to go to where the scanners were to see where they are positioned, what they do when the consignments pass through the scanners. What I really wanted, because when I go to Tema, I go and sit at where the scanners are, wait for trucks to get on, and then see myself on the screen as the trucks pass, and then the reports are generated. So I see it live. Okay. So why couldn't I also go to Kotoka International Airport and witness this happening?
Who are these persons who are preventing you? Who are these persons who said they were not going to allow you?
Well, some of them were airport security officers. Others claimed to be working for the national security. I didn't want to have any, conflict between our good selves. So when they said that, my officers really were upset, wanted to, and I said, I restrained them, don't worry. They claim they have instructions from above, they have instructions. And we work according to rules, regulations, instructions, directives. So if their directives are that persons other than them should not be allowed to go beyond a certain point, so be it. Let's leave it like that.
Are your officers the ones in charge when it comes to revenue mobilization and an inspection of items coming into the country, or these persons are the ones in charge?
Those persons have a role to play. Customs, you see, we need to really understand the intersectoral, interinstitutional arrangement and the respective roles of these. Our roles are supposed to complement one another. We are not supposed to live in a compartmentalized silo atmosphere where you do your part, you care less about what others do. It's a joint effort. That's why we now have joint border management and all that. Okay. So, yes, if an aircraft arrives, it will arrive with human beings. The human beings will come with goods, their items. So, who sees to the human beings? It's the immigration. So, the immigration will have to check the documents of these persons. When they finish that, that's the end of this as far as that. Then the goods that the persons have brought or will be bringing later, either by sea or by air, whatever, now goes into the remit of customs. It is customs that have the mandate to look at the goods, to apply the law to these goods. If there are goods that by law duties should be paid on, then customs will look at the nature of the goods, see the proper description of the goods, and apply the proper values for duties to be paid. That's the customs. Okay, so in performing that role,
yes, go ahead.
In performing that role, all others have not been mandated. The acts are there, statutes have been passed. So you see, if you want to veer off into somebody's domain, you can easily make a case.
Are they not veering off into your domain?
First and foremost, when they say national security, every one of us, all the institutions that play security rules are part of the national security architecture.
So are they not veering into your domain?
Wait. Now, then we have those working directly under the National Security Council Secretariat. Those are the ones every one of us calls national security people. Okay, so then they will invoke an existing law to say that if it has security implications. But if you read the Customs Act, customs rules, regulations everywhere, we also have that responsibility of looking at things that are of security implications. Public safety, public security, public health, all that are part of customs. Great. If you are bringing goods, the goods you are bringing in, are they goods that the law permits you to bring them? For instance, if they are weapons, that's security implication. If they are even food, is it the type that the laws permit us, the appropriate state institutions like Food and Drugs Authority or Ghana Standards Authority? So, but we, customs, will have to do that. Every consignment that is coming in,
Great.
The nature of it, whether it's permitted by law or not, and if by law duties have to be paid on it, all that falls directly in the remit of customs, because the other people do not have the mandate, expertise to value and ask people to pay duties.
So
that's
these national security persons who are doing this, are they veering into your domain?
Certainly some aspects of their operations, I would say they are usurping the powers of customs. And I have made it clear, I have had discussions with them, but you see, we are not supposed to fight over theft. We are supposed to work towards a national goal. All of us have one objective, national security, national development, and all that. And so we are all partners in the performance of security duties and the performance of national development. So we should always look at ways and means of bringing, collaborating, and working together rather than looking at our differences. That's why I didn't want to, as it were, exaggerate or go so much about that.
Yes, but let's look at
on that occasion, I called somebody in charge of that, and he said he was sorry it happened that way, but we needed to have ABC. So a conversation around, but you see, if it was done to a whole commissioner, what about my officers who would, on daily basis, are being subjected to that humiliation? And I feel so bad about it, because when I witnessed it, and I was told that this is what they do to them on daily basis.
So, in effect, I mean, I just want to have the understanding. In effect, there are instances where officials of customs are prevented from doing their job as stipulated by law, by national security.
Whereby some other institutions, I won't say, because I'm saying that everybody is part of.
Okay, so but by the National Security Council or Secretariat?
For instance, on that day, airport security officers were part of this whole thing. And when we try to go closer to the scanners, we also, so if an officer is to look at an item, a consignment that has come in, to be able to say that I saw this item, it passed through the scanners, and then everything as per the scanners was okay, so now we are sure about it, and then I can help in saying this is it, and therefore these are the values if it is something that duty should be paid on. But if the person is prevented from getting close to the scanners, he doesn't see what is in there, and yet he will be required to do some work on it. So that's why I'm saying that the principle behind all these things, the measures, the mechanisms, checks and balances, are to ensure that our work complements one another. Exactly. And at the same time would not lead to possible abuses by any of these institutions, and possible way of, as it were, veering off from our mandate. So
in this instance, I just want a clarification. In this instance, some of your officers have officers of, and I use national security to refer to the national security operatives, as we've come to know them. I mean, you've talked about those from the National Security Secretary, the Council, as we've come to know them. So that's what I'm making reference to. And these persons, under certain circumstances, sometimes prevent your officers from doing the work that is mandated of them by law. And as a result, you say, these persons are veering into your mandate, which eventually affects revenue mobilization, doesn't it?
Yeah, it has the potential of affecting the revenue. For instance, you see, we need to understand the concept of operation. At the airport, the overall security of the airport is vested in an institution. It's not in the hands of customs. If you go to the seaports, the same arrangement. The overall security of that place is vested in a state institution. So the only thing is that in playing our rules, we need to recognize the fact that others also play rules that complement or that would feed into ours. So I understand that the overall security arrangements at the airport is not vested in customs. That's why I agree. But customs, when it gets to revenue and aspects of security, customs have a role to play, and that role is mandated by statutes, by rules, by regulations, legislative.
And that should be adhered to.
And that should be allowed to work. Because if you don't allow the custom officer to do his work, and you arrogate it to yourself, and you say, I have, first and foremost, let me make this point clear. We have some aura of suspicion around ourselves, and that somehow affects this whole beautiful architecture of interstate institutional arrangement. Somebody thinks that, okay, let me do this because I think this person is doing that. But if you look at the customs way of doing things, everything has an inbuilt mechanism to deal with every eventuality. Okay. So we will just have to be allowed to do what we have to.
And ever since you've made that call, has that happened again? Have your officers complained?
Yes. It's not like it's gone, it's dead. Even after
they're still being prevented.
I had a lot of calls, and my officers were saying, yes, this one, you've hit the nail right on the head, because this humiliation is still ongoing. And I had discussed it at some other levels, so I didn't want them to think that nothing was being done. But it's something that really is of concern, that we are working in the same environment, and then not that you want to go there for any thing of your own, but for official duties, and yet you are restricted in your movement. You are allowed to go to some parts and not others.
By the port security.
Yes. So that's quite unfortunate.
That's quite unfortunate. But let's get to another important issue, and it has to do with tax exemption. It's one thing that Ghanaians have been talking about. The fact that Professor Bob King has talked about how about $2 billion to tax exemptions. The IES talked about losing 5 billion Ghana cedis to tax exemptions. There's been a whole conversation on tax exemptions. You're within this space. Now, some have said, look, we need to totally review this. We seem to be giving tax exemptions too much. What's your position on all of this?
First and foremost, we need to, why would tax exemptions be given? You sign an agreement with an entity. You want investment. You want somebody to come and construct your roads. You want somebody to undertake a project for you. And the person says, okay, as part of the conditions, the equipment that I'm bringing, I want you to exempt them from payment of duties, taxes. Now, if you agree and you sign, it is part of the agreement and therefore has to be respected. That's most of the thing, that is what I see. Most of these things come, some of the mining companies, some of the road contractors who bring heavy equipment. That costs so much. The capital with which they pay, because the duties are based on the values. So it means it will be several millions of cedis, or in some cases dollars or euros, to be able to pay for that. So you want the investment, and therefore, as one of the things that you can do to entice them to come with this investment, to come and construct the road that you need urgently, to come and maybe mine the ores for you because you lack capacity, you don't have the equipment to do that. So you agree to this. So if by agreements, by contracts, you have agreed to these tax waivers or exemptions, then you need to go to, and most of these go to Parliament, and Parliament approves. So it's part of the package. So if it is part of the package, you cannot then say that I want you to come, but now I don't want this tax exemption or tax waiver that we've already agreed on.
Some have said we need to review it because
Fine.
we're losing so much revenue.
Way too. It's just like cutting your tongue and then eating it. It will come in one way or the other. There are two possibilities. Some are suggesting that let them pay the duties on these equipment upfront, and when in fact they use the equipment to do what they intended to do, then you refund to them. It comes back to the same, or let them bring it, government provide your portion, or the state institution provide your counterpart aspect of it. So you need to. So if you take the revenue from them, the state will have to pay them back. So it's not bad in itself to have these assumptions. It is the possible abuses that go with that really are of concern, not the fact that assumptions have been given. Assumptions in themselves are geared towards some good purposes.
Now we've seen the abuses in certain instances.
Yes, so you work on the abuses. You work on the abuses. If you have capacity to deal with the possible abuses, that's the best way to go about it. But if you lack the capacity, as some are suggesting, let everybody pay.
Do we have the capacity to deal with abuses?
To some extent, we do. We may fall short in some areas, but we have the capacity to deal with these matters. And most often, all these will have to be done electronically. It's why we have human interface. That's where the danger is. If you have to send somebody to go and check whether this is done or not. But if everything is in the system, and the system has been automated in such a way that if you said you were bringing caterpillars to come and construct road, and the caterpillars have a lifespan, everything about those caterpillars, the inventory, everything is there, so that if the lifespan of a D10 or whatever is supposed to be, say, 4 or 5 years, depending on the nature of the road you are constructing, and you have means of monitoring, certainly you can deal with that matter. So that caterpillar cannot just vanish. So it is how we deal with the matter, both by way of the people who are seeking the exemptions and those who are to monitor the execution of the exemptions. That's where we have our challenge. So it may not in itself be the major source of our woes, but it could contribute to leakages of revenue if we abuse and we don't put in the right mechanisms to deal with the situation.
Thank you very, very much, Colonel Kojo Damwa, for joining us here on Upfront on the JoyNews channel. Thank you for doing the watching. My name is Winston Amma. That's all from us this evening. See you next week. Have a lovely evening.